Hey, this is Chris Scott, founder of Fit Recovery. Today we'll talk about 6 ways that alcohol causes nutrient deficiencies. I spend a lot of time on my site discussing how to repair the obvious damage that alcohol does to our bodies over time. And I haven't spent quite as much time discussing the root causes of that damage and the ways that specifically alcohol causes those deficiencies. So here we'll talk about 6 main ways. There could be many others. But something I wanted to point out first is that if you had asked me after I quit drinking if I had any nutrient deficiencies, I would have given you a blank stare and said, no, I'm fine. But clearly that wasn't the case because after I gradually discovered a number of very basic supplements, things like B vitamins and magnesium, omega-3 fish oil, and some amino acids, I started feeling way better. It wasn't, I felt like a new person, like I'd been transferred into some kind of alternate reality that just wasn't as bad. And so it's really, some of the symptoms of nutrient deficiencies are very subtle. And so here we'll talk about how exactly alcohol causes those over time. And of course, the more you've been drinking and the longer you've been drinking, the worse your nutrient deficiencies are. By the time I had quit drinking, I was drinking a huge amount, sometimes up to a handle of vodka a day. And that was after I promised myself that I wouldn't start drinking in the afternoons. I gradually broke that rule. So as my alcohol addiction got worse, I started drinking more and more, and thereby accelerated these deficiencies. But this is a topic that, in my opinion, is vastly underrated and ignored by a lot of uh, traditional treatment programs that tend to focus on the spiritual aspect, which is important, and there's something to be said for that. But physical recovery is also extremely important. So, in that vein, I think it's good to know why these deficiencies occur. Here's a summary of how alcohol causes nutrient deficiencies. The first and most obvious mechanism is that alcohol is a diuretic. So it flushes water and water soluble nutrients and some trace minerals out of the system. This is not a big deal for someone who drinks occasionally, but when it happens every single day over a prolonged period of time, the deficiencies can start to compound and add up. Alcohol also damages the gut lining, so it has a corrosive effect on the lining of the stomach and small intestine, which directly inhibits the absorption of nutrients. Alcohol also damages the gut microbiome. The microbiome is the delicate balance of microorganisms in the gut, some of which are very beneficial and which we need to process nutrients and to make available nutrients for the rest of the body. Foregone calories is another way that alcohol causes deficiencies. And all I mean by that is that people who consume a high percentage of their calories in the form of toxic alcohol are not getting the micronutrients that they need from fruits and vegetables. They're not getting the proper macronutrient ratios, so fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. And that can really add up over time. Alcohol also overworks the liver and the pancreas. And so most people know that alcohol is processed by the liver and that it can cause severe liver damage over time. But most people don't know that the liver is necessary for the processing of nutrients. So when your liver is preoccupied with breaking down alcohol, it can't process nutrients and make them available to the rest of the body. An overworked pancreas is also very common with alcohol addiction because alcohol is a highly refined sugar that induces an insulin spike when it is consumed. And again, this is something that's not a huge deal for someone who drinks occasionally, but in the case of someone who is a daily drinker or a heavy drinker, insulin is not only removing excess blood sugar, it is removing nutrients like amino acids. And this removal can turn into nutrient deficiencies over time and also lead to bad conditions like insulin resistance and diabetes and an inflamed pancreas or pancreatitis, which is very common in people who are addicted to alcohol. Last but not least, acetaldehyde is a toxic byproduct of alcohol that indirectly leads to nutrient deficiencies because it requires precious antioxidants to mop it up. So as you can see, there are a number of ways that alcohol causes nutrient deficiencies, and they're not all one-dimensional. They're layers of mechanisms that over time can cause a lot of physical problems. So because alcohol is a diuretic, it flushes water out of the system. And most people have firsthand experience with this. If you know what it's like to have one too many and then break the seal and then you're going to the bathroom for the rest of the night, you're obviously flushing water out of your system. And it's not just the water from the alcoholic beverages you consumed, it's also other water that's been stored in your body. And one of the main symptoms of a hangover is dehydration. And withdrawal is made much worse by dehydration. People who drink for long periods of time are chronically dehydrated. And because a lot of nutrients are water soluble, this is not a good situation. You're deprived of water and water soluble nutrients. And a lot of water soluble vitamins like B vitamins, vitamin C, for example, these are also flushed from the body in relatively small quantities when you drink. So it's not a big deal if it's an isolated situation. If it's someone who has a drink every now and then, it's not too big of a deal. However, for people who are addicted to alcohol, that really compounds over time. And so those nutrient deficiencies tend to build up. There are other diuretics that are commonly consumed. Caffeine is one of them. So coffee is considered a diuretic, and it can make you go to the bathroom, but it's not toxic. Alcohol has a number of ways that it leaches water and nutrients from the body, and it's more of a serious diuretic than, let's say, caffeine. Alcohol also damages the gut lining. So you can see in that picture here that the structure of the lining of the small intestine actually changes, and the stomach for that matter, with corrosive alcohol being added to the system over time. And so it's harder to absorb nutrients if your microvilli, which are the little structures that absorb nutrients, are damaged. And alcohol, specifically acetaldehyde, which is that main toxic byproduct of alcohol, directly damages those microvilli. And so there are also nutrients that are required for proper gut absorption that need to be involved in maintaining the health of that gut lining. Folic acid is a B vitamin, which is a good example of such a nutrient. And so you end up with a vicious cycle in which you can't absorb the nutrients that you need in order to absorb nutrients. So that's a very bad situation. In addition to that, alcohol depletes digestive enzymes that you need to break down nutrients from food. So a lot of people who quit drinking find that they need to take not only basic supplements like B vitamins and all of the other supplements that I discuss on my website, but they need to take digestive enzymes as well, and often a probiotic, which we'll get into in a minute, in order to maintain or repair their digestive health. So the alcohol also damages the gut microbiome, which is the microorganisms that exist in your gut that process nutrients and are necessary for a healthy functioning intestinal tract. And that's not just necessary for proper absorption of nutrients, it's necessary for your immune system health, for your brain health. There's a lot of research coming out about the link between the gut and the brain. But the point here is that these bacteria, the beneficial bacteria, probiotics that you would find in yogurt or in kombucha or in probiotic supplements, are damaged by continual alcohol exposure. And alcohol tends to feed invasive yeast species and non-beneficial bacteria species, and can even lead to parasitic overgrowth in the gut. So people who have been drinking for a long time need to look at their gut health, try to consider it, maybe consult an expert in gut health in order to try to rebuild their gut. Because if you have a severely damaged gut, it can be difficult to absorb nutrients that you try to use to repair your body from all of that alcohol. Foregone calories is another big issue, especially for people who have been drinking for months or years. So it stands to reason that someone who's drinking, let's say 10 or 15 or maybe even 20 drinks a day, I was once in that category, is obtaining the majority of their calories from alcohol. So that's crowding out calories that could be consumed from healthy foods. So you're not getting those macronutrients, you're not getting the good fats and the proteins and complex carbohydrates that would give you energy and help your body repair itself and provide the building blocks for healthy functioning. And you are instead having toxic calories that your body then has to work even harder to deal with. And I'm referring to alcohol there. I don't like the word empty calories. I think toxic calories makes more sense because it's not just empty in the sense that you can't use them. They're toxic because they need to be burned and removed, and the toxic byproducts like acetaldehyde have to be removed. Another thing worth pointing out here is that alcohol causes an insulin spike because it is a highly refined sugar that makes people crave sugary and fatty foods. So that common scenario in which people have a bunch of beers or shots and then they head to get pizza or ice cream or whatever is not far-fetched. There's a scientific basis for that. Their bodies are craving foods that they would crave in a sort of survival mode. Their blood sugar has been wiped out by that insulin spike, so they're not in the mood for broccoli or healthy lean meats. They're in the mood for things that's going to fix that situation as quickly as possible. There's also, for people who are in the late stages of alcohol addiction, you often find a look, a kind of emaciated look. The woman in that picture there is a good example. People who are drinking most of their calories end up with just deteriorating bodies. And so a lot of the times they can't even absorb nutrients because their gut is so damaged, and all they can absorb is alcohol since it's easily absorbed through the stomach lining. And so even if they try to eat normal foods, they're not absorbing a large percentage of those foods, and they're not getting the micronutrients that they need. An overworked liver and pancreas is also a big problem that leads to nutrient deficiencies. And most people understand that the liver is important to remove alcohol and to process it into less toxic components. But what most people miss is that the liver is required to process vitamins and minerals and fatty acids and even amino acids to make them available to the body. And it simply cannot do this when it's busy trying to get rid of all of that alcohol. And the liver detoxifies alcohol at a rate of about 1 drink per hour. There's some research showing that alcoholics, people whose bodies have adapted to chronic alcohol exposure, can process alcohol a little bit quicker, up to 2 drinks per hour. That's only true if they haven't substantially damaged their liver. So up to a certain point, if you are addicted to alcohol, your liver might be slightly more efficient at processing it because it's adapted. But the problem is that's not going to last forever. And it only goes up to about 2 drinks an hour, which if you've been drinking for some time, your tolerance is probably such that you're drinking over 10 drinks a day. And so you're spending literally half your day at least trying to get alcohol out of your system. And none of that time basically is spent processing nutrients, building hormones that your body needs, and doing all of those crucial liver functions. I also mentioned the pancreas here because I think that the theme of insulin is important. The pancreas needs to produce the right amount of insulin to regulate your blood sugar levels, but if it's doing it all the time in response to alcohol, then what happens is you're pulling nutrients, including amino acids, out of your bloodstream. And so you can end up with a severely overworked pancreas that's not good at producing insulin anymore. You end up with insulin sensitivity, in which your blood sugar levels don't respond to the insulin that you're releasing into your bloodstream, and you can end up with full body inflammation from a non-functioning or improperly suboptimally functioning liver and pancreas, and that only leads to a further need for nutrients. Acetaldehyde is as I mentioned, the most toxic byproduct from alcohol. It's associated with those hangover symptoms, headaches, stomach aches, nausea, inflammation. It even causes DNA damage that over time can lead to cancer. And so, as we already noted, acetaldehyde plays a vital role, or I guess a key role, in damaging the gut, which then in turn reduces the absorption of nutrients. But it's also true that the antioxidants that your body needs to repair itself from daily stressors, things like pollution or things that other bad foods that you might be putting in your body, those antioxidants can't be used for those functions if they're being used to constantly mop up acetaldehyde. So before I quit drinking, I felt horrible all the time. I have no doubt that a big reason for that was that I had an overload of acetaldehyde in my system. I'd wake up in the morning, my face would be puffy. Actually, my face was puffy all the time. My eyes were red, and I just didn't feel good. I was always lightheaded, and that was beyond just, it wasn't all withdrawal, it was just the poisoning. And my body was desperately trying to use all of the nutrients available to it to get rid of that acetaldehyde, but it just wasn't enough. So what are some symptoms of nutrient deficiencies? I started to touch on that. I guess the question here is, why does it matter if you have nutrient deficiencies? And I think that's a valid question. As I mentioned, if you had asked me if I had nutrient deficiencies when I quit drinking, I would have said no, I ate quite well. But in fact, I had a number of symptoms of nutrient deficiencies, and I didn't even realize that's what they were. I thought it was just the misery of alcohol addiction. I didn't really see it as a physical problem. And when I went to detox, I was encouraged to see it as a spiritual problem, almost kind of like I was being punished for my alcohol addiction. This is just part of the disease, as they said. And, it may or may not get better if I was honest with myself, which is, I'm sure it's good to be honest with yourself. It's good to have a spiritual renaissance after you quit drinking. But these symptoms, such as anxiety, depression, and insomnia, just not feeling good, a bleak sense of life, these can be traced in a lot of circumstances to biochemical depression, which is led to directly by these nutrient deficiencies. It stands to reason that if you've been flooding your body with a toxic substance for a long period of time, you're not going to have the hormone levels that you need to function right, because your liver is not producing those hormones. Your brain is going to be depleted of neurotransmitters, which require amino acids and fatty acids and vitamins and minerals to be cofactors in the synthesis of those chemicals. And this bleak sense of life can last for years, especially for people who do nothing to proactively manage their lifestyle when they quit drinking. So that's really a big theme on my website, Fit Recovery, is I'm not trying to discourage anyone from following a spiritual program or doing what they need to do to sort their lives out. I think that's fantastic. But to the extent that we can proactively manage our physical recovery, we'll feel much better. So I've been really encouraged by emails that I've gotten from people who have struggled for, in some cases, years through numerous rehabs and programs and legal consequences, trying to feel like life was worth living. And then after taking a few supplements, it sounds too good to be true, but their entire sense of life becomes transformed. And I know that those stories are real because that's the same thing that happened to me. I kind of gradually discovered a lot of these basic supplements over time. And so every time that I would discover something that helped me, it would bring me to a higher level of daily functioning. And the benefits of that higher level of functioning would compound over time. And so it's finally brought me to the point where, I can't even imagine going back to the lens through which I viewed my life when I was drinking, because we view our lives through the lens of our internal biochemistry, and my biochemistry was so messed up, and it doesn't have to be that way. I have written some articles about the body and the mind connection, but I think that there's a misnomer there, because your brain is part of your body. So if you want your mind to be as healthy and strong as possible, then you need to pay attention to your brain health. And I think that starts with repairing every cell in your body if you've been addicted to alcohol. So I've already touched on a number of these points, but for a lot of people who have been drinking for a long time, diet alone is not sufficient to fix these alcohol-induced deficiencies. It's just too difficult. It takes too long, especially if you have issues with gut absorption, to eat all of the foods that you would need to repair these deficiencies. At the same time, diet is important. So if you fill your body with donuts and sugar-laden coffee and all of that stuff after you quit drinking, you're going to perpetuate that biochemical roller coaster that you were on with alcohol. So you'd want to avoid processed foods. I think a good rule of thumb is to eat real foods that would have been around 1,000 years ago. Try to eat things with as few steps between the food source and your mouth as possible. And by steps, I mean factory processing and all of that. So That's about it for this presentation. You can learn much more on my website, Fit Recovery, and that's fit-recovery.com. If you've liked this video, then feel free to give me a thumbs up and stay posted for more. Thanks and take care.